Welcome to the public debriefing of the 49th BEREC plenary meeting. This is the fourth BEREC public briefing of the year, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today following our plenary meeting we held in Stockholm last year. And unfortunately, as you can see, we had to switch back to a virtual debriefing because of obvious reasons. But the good news is that we really did enjoy the physical Stakeholder Forum we had in Brussels last October. And it was very good to catch up and to see you again in person at that time. But today I will not be alone. I will be joined by our working group co-chairs, people helping me from the BEREC office and my team here from BIPT, Mick and Tim, but also by my estimated colleague, Annemarie Sipkes, who is the BEREC Chair 2022. Next slide, please. So for the agenda today, we'll give you the latest updates of the state of play of the work program for next year. It has already been presented during the last public debrief, but now we thank you for the rich feedback we received from you after public consultation, and Annemarie will explain how it was taken into account. Second topic on the agenda, we will brief you about a report to enable comparable national broadband coverage indicators throughout Europe. I'm sure you all know the annual DC reports issued by the European Commission, and this BEREC report assesses how NRAs, public authorities and the European Commission can best analyze and compare the advances in broadband coverage in Europe. Then for the Open Internet Working Group, two topics. Of course, Klaus and Veronique will debrief you on BEREC's ongoing discussions regarding the recent rulings of the European Court of Justice related to net neutrality. We made further progress in our legal assessment of the ruling after the discussion we had at the last plenary meeting. We are now on the same page and ready to start reviewing the guidelines. But just before that, the Open Internet co-chairs will also very shortly present you a draft report on the update to the BEREC net neutrality regulatory assessment methodology, and this report will enter into public consultation. Then we will open the floor for the first set of questions from your side, and I'm sure you already have a question at that stage. And after that, we'll start the second part with the fixed network evolution working group. The co-chairs will sent your draft report on consistent approach to migration and copper switch off. This draft report encompasses very interesting and relevant reference material for NRAs undertaking the project of network migration, and this also will enter into public consultation. Then we will present you the BEREC opinion on the end users' rights. This opinion is a specific task that the co-legislators gave to BEREC in the code. And this is the first monitoring exercise on the markets and technological developments and their impacts on the application of the rights of end users in the code. Then this will be followed by another opinion, also stemming from the codes on national implementation and functioning of the General Authorisation. And lastly, our regulatory framework co-chairs will also present you the final report on the COVID-19 crisis lessons learned, and then the second set of Q&A. But Next slide, please. During the last plenary meeting, we also adopted other documents which will not be presenting today. There is the 9th BEREC roaming report on transparency and comparability of international roaming tariffs. Another regulatory report about termination rates at European level. And then a couple of workshops summary reports to provide insight and lessons learned about workshop that BEREC organized about 5G. So you have the one about the diversification of 5G ecosystem, the report of the workshop on NRA experiences with 5G, and a report on the workshop on EMF, how BEREC can best promote science-based EMF exposure limits recommended by experts. Then there are a number of other reports we adopted during the plenary, such as BEREC annual regulatory accounting report, and you can find this document on the BEREC website. We also decided to turn 2 ad hoc groups into permanent working groups, sustainability group and a 5G cybersecurity group. They will now have a more permanent status in BEREC's work. And for us, it's clear that these topics are highly relevant for Europe and BEREC as well. In addition to that, I can update you on some other topics we discussed during our last plenary meeting. The heads were debriefed on the current state of play of the roaming negotiation, for which, as you know, a political agreement has been found at the same time. In addition, we discussed also the state of play in the negotiations of the Digital Markets Act. We also updated the heads about the public consultation of the state aid guidelines for broadband and the consultation that is currently ongoing at the European Commission. So BEREC will be providing input for that, as you know. Then very briefly, we also discussed the planning that needs to be done to kickstart the program of the process of the working program for 2023, as well as the organization of the next Stakeholder Forum, which we will held here in Brussels on 23rd March. And in addition to our regular work item, we also held a workshop in Stockholm about the internet ecosystem and exchange views about the experiences NRAs have in terms of tackling any issues regarding the internet ecosystem. This was a very useful debate and a very useful preparation for the report that BEREC will issue on that topic later next year. So next slide, please. So this is your Christmas presents in terms of public consultations. As I already mentioned, stakeholders will have more time to answer that because of the Christmas break. So this will be 2 documents: the draft report on update of BEREC net neutrality regulatory assessment methodology, as well as the draft BEREC report on a consistent approach to migration and copper switch off will be launched today, and the closing date will be the 28th of January. So next slide, please. So today, as I mentioned, I'm happy to be joined by the co-chairs of several working groups that were involved in the document that we published. And let me repeat again how we can interact and ask questions. Some of you have already submitted questions ahead of this event, and we will address these questions first to the 2 dedicated Q&A slots foreseen on the agenda. And then, of course, in the meantime, if you wish to add a question in relation to the presentations or to our work in general, don't hesitate. And for that, please use the chat box. With that, let's start with the first presentation from Annemarie Sipkes, incoming BEREC Chair, about BEREC upcoming work program. Annemarie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michel. And of course, this final presentation up for approval of the BEREC Work Programme 2022 was an important moment to start. At the beginning of our plenary session, the other was at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, we succeeded in transferring the presidency hammer from one chair BIPT to the next ACM. Looking forward to that new role with all respect for the work of my impressive predecessor. Next slide, please. You may remember that last time we talked about the work program. We said it contains more work streams than ever. It is full with all the various items that concern us all when we look at the importance of connectivity within Europe. Next slide, please. And to be able to make sure that we see the balance over the whole portfolio, we have identified three pillars. Under ACT, we are preparing guidelines on roaming on open internet, on which the co-chairs will present later today, and provide comparison tools. We will undertake work under the header of Innovate when it comes to the 5G value chain, for example, or the internet ecosystem, which Michel already referred to. And we will also have workshops and undertake studies to learn about new practices in the market, such as Open RAN and artificial intelligence, and the development of business services in the new technologies. Next slide, please. I think last time we also presented the running order of our deliverables. We have tried to distribute them more evenly over the year. So here you can see where we will have our workshop and where we will issue draft reports and draft guidelines for public consultation, which is of course later transferred into the publication of final guidelines. And as is custom every year, there will also be work that will go on and be only finalized in 2023. So overall, I think a full agenda. The plenary 4 was, of course, next slide, please. In the light of the responses from the public consultation, we have all in all received responses from 15 stakeholders, from various parts of our stakeholder community, consumers, incumbents, new entrants, and also from the different technologies, so both fixed, mobile, as well as satellite operators. In general, we found there was the comments were quite supportive of the choices made. There were some questions on what would be the precise nature, objective, or depth or scope of the work, and we have tried to clarify that wherever possible. Our final work program and the report on the outcome of the public consultation can be found on the BEREC website. It will be published today. Next slide, please. As we started, of course, or halfway our consultation period, we had the Stakeholder Forum that Michel already referred to. It was the first where we had a physical meet and greet with the co-chairs of the expert working groups. We have heard that was deemed a huge success to increase the understanding on both sides of the way we work, our processes, and the way we want to be open for comments and dialogue. There was also, I think, we all, of course, also appreciated the opportunity to finally meet again in person. We are still awaiting the results of the survey, but I'm happy to announce that that it took actually very little convincing to have our new Stakeholder Forum in Brussels on the 23rd of March also include a meet and greet, and that is very shortly after the one in October. We are very aware of that. I think that with the packed work program and the challenges up ahead, it is good to start this off as a new tradition. So that is all from my side in this part. If you go to the next slide, then I would be happy to transfer the word to Begonia and Julia, the co-chairs of the Statistics and Indicators chairs.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. On behalf of the Statistics and Indicators Working Group and my colleague Julia, I'm going to present the BEREC report on comparable national broadband coverage indicators throughout Europe. Next slide, please. So this report deals with the methodologies used to deliver the data that nurtures the broadband coverage in Europe study. As you know, this is a study commissioned by the EC, published once a year, that aims at tracking the progress in broadband coverage towards the targets that have been set. And some of its most relevant indicators are showcased in the DESI reports. This is a well-established study, more than a decade it's been going on, comprehensive and very complex, running throughout 30 countries and providing many and plenty indicators. Article 22 of the Code and the BEREC guidelines provide the basis for a more comparable coverage metrics across Europe. So with this report, BEREC is using this opportunity that the guidelines provide to reflect on what are the possible ways to improve on the comparability of the national, rural, and NUTS3 coverage indicators that are included within the study and to establish useful recommendations. Next slide, please. Now, what are those recommendations? They are partly based on the BEREC guidelines in Article 22, but not exclusively. They are based on the BEREC's insights throughout the process, the discussion in the drafting and the working group and CN and the plenary, but also discussions with OCAs and stakeholders since we've had several workshops with them. Some of these recommendations are of very general nature, but others are quite methodological. On the general recommendations, the first one is that the sourcing of the data should entirely rely on the public authorities that have to deliver the Article 22 broadband maps. The provision of data by operators should be exceptional and where properly justified. The public authorities play a role in centralizing the data information and verifying this information. The report also recommends a higher degree of transparency. Internal, this is when the information is provided to the EC, and also external, this is in the published report, so that the methodologies that frame the results can be understood. Next slide, please. Regarding the methodological recommendations, some of them are based on Article 22 guidelines. First one is that the study should depart from the concept of households and households past and rely on the new concept of premises and premises past, which is the cornerstone of the Article 22 guidelines and the main concept that will be used in broadband maps across Europe. The study also encourages to use the definition of VHCN according to the BEREC guidelines, and in particular, the definition of fixed VHCN that encompasses other technologies that are not currently considered in the study. It is also recommending to align the definitions with the maximum achievable speed and peak time speed definitions in the Article 22 guidelines and depart from the existing definition. The report has a whole section on data aggregation, since this is quite an important aspect of this task. It recommends that the data is to be collected at the highest granularity available, if possible, address level for fixed and maximum 100 by 100 meter grids for mobile. And moreover, it recommends that to provide the NUTS3 level indicators, and this data is aggregated also at the highest granularity available. If the data is not granular, and that happens in some cases, for example, when data is collected at parish or municipal level, the formula that is suggested in the study to treat overlaps should be used. But if authorities rely on other formulas, they need to justify why they are doing this. The report finishes with two sections that are food for thought. They do not really provide recommendations, but ideas for the future. One on rural coverage indicators, depicting what would be the ideal situation to have comparable indicators regarding rural coverage. And another one on 5G coverage, which depicts what is the picture as of today on the different 5G maps that we have across Europe, and what are the possibilities to have better information in the future. And like this, I finish and I give the floor to my fellow co-chairs on the open internet. Please, Veronique, if you want, you have the floor.
Thank you, Begonia. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Open Internet Working Group, together with my colleague Klaus, we will present you today two topics. We first look at the draft update to the BEREC net neutrality regulatory assessment methodology. Next slide, please. The objective of this methodology is to help NRAs in the monitoring and supervision of the provisions of the Open Internet regulation based on various net neutrality measurement tools. This methodology provides a harmonized guidance on measuring Internet access service quality. It is targeted at maximizing measurement accuracy, consistency, and enabling the comparison of measurement results between the different member states. The methodology, the first version, has already been released in 2017, and it has been subsequently revised and enhanced by assessing recent developments in the market, as well as by reflecting on NRA's experiences. The updated methodology is now submitted to a public consultation, as already mentioned by Michel, and it will run over 6 weeks. We would welcome feedback from the different stakeholders to the email address indicated on the slide. And we plan to publish the final version of the methodology, the consultation report, as well as the non-confidential stakeholder responses in June 2020, after adoption of the deliverables at plenary 2. Next slide, please. What are the main changes to the version of 2017? The main changes can be summarized as follows. We have redrafted the speed measurement methodology to make it sound and solid. Moreover, we have removed some of the unused net neutrality measurements and some guidance on individual results assessment. Regarding the chapter on end-user environment factors, that has been updated and restructured. We have added a new chapter on the privacy and data protection aspects. And regarding the measurement results, we have provided guidance to assess the general quality of Internet access services. There we provide a multi-step process, as illustrated in the figure below. And the different steps consist of collecting the measurement results, validating the data, post-processing and aggregating data, analyzing the results, and publishing the results. If in the process we see a need for additional measurements, then we start the procedure from the beginning with the collection of the measurements, and then it goes ahead as described here. Next slide, please. We have also defined some speed measurement requirements. The first requirement is about the multi-platform. Where speed measurement is initiated by an end user, it must be possible for an end user to execute such a measurement via his or her own usual device. And the measurement can also run on other hardware such as game consoles, modem clients, and TV boxes. A second requirement is that end users should be supported to perform measurements within a web browser or within the restricted sandbox of an add-on on a device app, and there should be no need to install any client software on the personal computer. Another requirement is that resulting speed measurement should objectively reflect the speed available to the end user. The time for individual speed measurement must be short enough to complete the measurement without any frustration. And the duration of the measurement should be transparent to the end user. The methodology must also support the typical speeds available in the relevant markets, and it must support both of the IPv4 and IPv6 protocol. This is the end of my presentation, and I now pass the floor to my dear colleague, Klaus. Thank you.
Many thanks, Veronica, and good afternoon also from my behalf. I'm going to present you some further information regarding the EECC rulings on the Open Internet Regulation. Next slide, please. First, I would like to give a warm thanks for the stakeholders responding our call for input. It was a very, very short period of time, and we were very grateful to see 26 contributions, and from which 23 were non-confidential and published in BEREC website. If you are interested in those, I think the easiest way to get the contributions is to go to the Open Internet section of the BEREC website. We wanted to engage with the stakeholders in early phase and to hear your views. And I think we can really say that the contributions helped our legal analysis and also to steer the work on updating the Open Internet guidelines. So many thanks everybody participating. As you might remember, BEREC has decided to update the Open Internet guidelines, and the public consultation will start next March after the plenary one, and the final guidelines will be published in June after the plenary 2 next year. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to share some preliminary conclusions. We have done quite a, let's say, thorough legal analysis and had very good discussions within BEREC. And I'm now just happy that we are able to share you already some preliminary conclusions. First, I think it's quite obvious that the EECC stated that zero tariff offers are incompatible with the equal treatment obligation by the mere activation of zero tariff option. The court did not assess the individual limitations of use, but stated that the incompatibility remains irrespective of the form or nature or terms of use. The court has also concluded that it is relevant whether such zero tariff option is based on an agreement or that there is actual demand by customers or content providers for such an offer. So based on this, we have preliminarily concluded that equal treatment obligation applies also to zero tariff offers without any technical discrimination. That was also the case for the Vodafone Pass offers addressed by 2 of the 3 late rulings. So we can say that zero tariff offers violate the equal treatment obligation, and that the same conclusion is likely to be applicable also to some similar offers not directly addressed by the rulings, like the zero rating operator's own services or sponsored data. Next slide, please. Well, not to make this too pessimistic, I think it's very good to note that we believe there's still some room for price differentiation. Especially, this is really all about, the obligation is about the equal treatment. And if the traffic is treated equally, the obligation doesn't really prevent price differentiation. For that reason, we have also copied the Article 3.3 first subparagraph that describes the equal treatment obligation for your information. I'm not really going to read it through, but I think it really gives you quite a good idea what the obligation actually is. So based on this, we can say that application agnostic tariffs are very likely to be compatible with the equal treatment obligation. We are not really able to give you a full list of different tariffs, so and it's not really the intention, but to give you some ideas and some examples what could be seen permissible. So basically the tariffs for different speeds, for different quality of service levels, for different data volumes, or different tariffs for different user groups. We also see that the application agnostic zero tariffs could be possible, for example, during the weekend or off-peak times. And it could also be possible that end user activates a lower quality tariff that's then zero rated. And the regulation itself, it also includes some exceptions. So it's fair to note that the national legislation might also be applied with this regard. Next slide, please. To conclude my presentation, there's been quite a much discussion about the relationship between the different rulings. And we wanted to give you some preliminary conclusions also from this regard. In 2020, EECC gave its first ruling on open internet regulation in the case of Telenor Hungary. And in that case, the court just answered the questions put forward by the Hungarian court. The court focused in particular on the relationship between the provisions on Article 3.1, 2, and 3. Now, when we got 1 year later, the next 3 rulings, we saw that their decisions, the rulings, they didn't only answer the questions referred by the German courts, but the court has actually decided to assess the underlying admissibility of zero tariff options as such. As this has also been discussed by the stakeholders, we don't really see there to be a conflict between the rulings. In 2020, EECC provided a general assessment framework without explicitly clarifying the admissibility of zero rating as such. And now, in the late 3 rulings, the court is building on the 2020 ruling and just further developing the interpretation on how the equal treatment obligation should be applied to zero tariff options. And just to end my presentation, we want to note that all rulings from EECC are of equal value. Many thanks, and now back to me, Michel.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for the presentation. And in addition to this presentation of the co-chairs, I would like also to thank the stakeholders for their input provided in October after our call for input. And as you understand, based on the discussion we had at our meeting, we take the preliminary review that the Court of Justice rulings make it clear that zero tariff offers are by themselves incompatible with the equal treatment of traffic obligations in the open internet regulations. We also take the view that there is still room for price differentiation, especially when traffic is treated equally. So BEREC will now develop draft update guidelines, which will be published for public consultation in March 2022. So with that, let's start the Q&A, the first session. And I will start with a question I received from Luc Indricks from Hector. Has BEREC any updates in terms of timing about the review of the access recommendation? Well, to our knowledge, the European Commission has been slightly delayed with the access recommendation, and this is due to the high amount of NRA's notification or market analysis. So that's say we don't know exactly when the Commission will consult us, but this is expected to happen in Q1 of next year, and of course when the European Commission will consult BEREC, we will provide our opinion, and the Commission will take this into account when finalizing the recommendation. So it was for the first question. Then I have two questions for Annemarie, both from Emma O'Toole, GSMA. And the first question is related to the study, because Emma O'Toole asked, well, if it's possible to provide any details on the scope, the timing on this external study on wholesale mobile access connectivity, because this has been moved from the previous work item 1.4 in the draft work program. That is the first question for you, Annemarie. Over to you.
Thank you, Michel, and thank you for that question. As I said, we have a very full work program, and we decided to take off one of the issues that is of very much interest to us also as a chair for BEREC 2022, and it concerns the issue on the market dynamics in light of the 5G development. So what we will do is we will issue a chair study, which will be very much along the project description that you have read in the draft work program. So it will aim at the competitive conditions in possible identifiable submarkets with a forward-looking nature, especially since the markets for massive machine type communication and ultra-reliable low latency, for example, with the advent and rollout of 5G will have an impact, will develop in the coming years. And the study will look at the effect this has on market dynamics, purely as a fact-finding basis for possible future work of either individual NRAs or the BEREC community as a whole. So it will not encompass any policy recommendations or regulatory impact. It is just a fact-finding study aimed to get a better sense of the interplay between 5G technologies as well as market dynamics. With respect to the timing, a tender is about to be launched somewhere in the coming weeks. I hope that answers Emma's question.
Yes, thank you very much, Annemarie. And then I have a second question for you as well from Emma O'Toole of GSMA regarding the 5G value chain and the report we published yesterday. So the question is, can BEREC provide some additional insight on the change of the approach she noticed apparently? Over to you, Annemarie.
Yes, thank you very much for that question as well. As you understand, as I said, the mobile market and especially the rollout and implications of 5G is of keen interest to BEREC. For this, there are so many aspects that, of course, in this respect, we have published a 5G radar to make sure that we keep all the different aspects in view. The report that was issued yesterday contains mostly the lessons from a workshop. So we are very keen on collecting stakeholder input that you might have as a result of reading the report from the workshop. However, having a public consultation on something that is mainly based in a workshop, in a public workshop, is a bit it was not the right approach in our view. So we will also publish a questionnaire, will be published today or tomorrow on the BEREC website, asking you for your inputs, because our work on the 5G value chain has not come to an end, far from it. And we will take your inputs into account and into our program and work streams next year. And this is all, as I said, in light of all the various issues and themes that we want to do work on that are playing from our 5G radar. So yes, we are very much looking forward to your inputs, but please do that in the form of filling out the questionnaire that we will publish on BEREC.net rather than public consultation of this workshop report.
Thank you very much, Annemarie. And with that, let's move on to the second part, as there is no question anymore. And I will start by handing over to my colleagues, Bellinghen, Eric of the FNE Working Group. Over to you.
Thank you, Michel. Good afternoon, also on behalf of the FNE Working Group. The title of the presentation is Draft BEREC Report on a Consistent Approach to Migration and Copper Switch Off. Next slide, please. Network operators roll out fiber closer and closer to the end users, and therefore the importance of the copper-based access network decreases, and the NOAs are increasingly confronted with the situation that the SMP operator wants to decommission its legacy copper-based access network and, for example, to close main distribution frames MDFs. The objectives of this report are to provide an overview of the SMP operators' current status and plans for the copper switch off, to analyze in detail the rules set by the NOAs for the migration process and copper switch off, and to examine also further aspects of the migration process and copper switch off, for example, the SMP operators' framework for copper switch off and migration issues. Based on the results of this analysis, the report aims to identify a consistent approach to migration and copper switch off. The report is based on data provided by NOAs of 32 European countries, all 27 EU countries, and the report shows in 20 countries, the SMP operator has already announced that it plans to close the copper-based access network. In 13 of these 20 countries, the SMP operator has already closed copper-based network elements, for example MDFs. And in 17 countries, the NOA has already set rules for the migration process and copper switch off. Next slide, please. A consistent approach to migration and copper switch off has been identified based on the rules set by the NOAs of these 17 countries as follows. Type of procedure. The NOAs typically set the rules for the migration process and copper switch off in a market analysis procedure. Level or granularity of the rules. The level of the rules set by the NOA typically depend on the copper switch off the SMP operator pursues. For example, the rules are typically set at the level of the MDF if the SMP operator wants to close an MDF and together with the MDF all street cabinets in the area of the MDF. And the rules are typically set at the level of the street cabinet in case the SMP operator wants to close one street cabinet after the other and only then the MDF. Scope of the rules. The rules set by the NOA apply to the SMP operator and to the geographic area where the NOA has imposed access remedies on the SMP operator in accordance with Article 81 of the European Electronic Communications Code. Stakeholder involvement. The NOAs typically involve the stakeholders by means of the public consultation of the draft measure according to Article 23, paragraph 1 of the European Electronic Communications Code. Depending on national law, the transposition of Article 31, paragraph 1 of the European Electronic Communications Code, stakeholders may also have the legal status of a party in the procedure in which the NOA set the rules for the copper switch off. In certain circumstances, further stakeholder involvement is appropriate, for example, in case of details of the host's access products. Next slide, please. Notice period. The notice period typically depends on whether the alternate operators use the legacy copper-based host's access products of the SMP operator in the area where the SMP operator wants to decommission the access network. The notice period typically is between 6 and 12 months in case the alternate operators do not use any copper-based host access product of the SMP operator. The notice period is typically 1 to 3 years in case the alternative network operators use virtual and bundled local access or a bit stream at the same point of and over after the copper switch off. And the notice period is typically 2 to 3 years in case the alternative network operators use copper-based and bundled local loop. However, depending on national circumstances, the notice period may be shorter or longer. For example, the notice period tends to be shorter in case a significant experience has already been gained with the copper switch off, or in case the number of copper-based host access lines still in use is already low. Alternative host access products. The alternative network operators have to migrate their copper-based host access products to alternative host access products. And the fiber-based host access products imposed on the SMP operator as a usual remedy in a market analysis procedure are typically sufficient for the copper switch off. However, depending on national circumstances, also copper-specific alternative host access products may be appropriate. For example, in case of a copper switch off in a wide area where no broadband networks are available, or in case of symmetric regulation. The alternative host access products imposed on the SMP operator typically depends on the SMP operator's infrastructure, for example, the availability of ducts or point-to-point fiber, and therefore differ between the countries. In some countries, also alternative host access products of other operators than the SMP operator are available to some extent. Legacy copper-based host access products. The legacy copper-based host access products are normally also imposed on the SMP operator in a market analysis procedure. The SMP operators typically have to provide the copper-based host access products until the copper is switched off, for example, the MDF is closed. Next slide, please. Migration costs. The NOAs typically apply price regulation in the market analysis procedure to both the legacy copper-based host access products and the alternative host access products. Therefore, in many cases, there is no need for further specific rules on migration costs. However, under certain circumstances, also specific rules on migration costs are appropriate in order to avoid competitive distortions. Information of the SMP operator and monitoring. The SMP operators typically have to inform the alternative network operators, and in many cases also the NOA, on the migration process and copper switch off. Whether the NOA also monitor the migration process and copper switch off depends on national circumstances. However, in many countries this is the case. For example, an NOA may not monitor the migration process in case the migration process is still in the beginning, or in case the number of copper-based host access lines still in use is already low. A need for monitoring may also arise from the transposition of Article 81, paragraph 2 of the European Electronic Communications Code. Further rules. The NOA imposed on the SMP operator the obligation to offer alternative host access products, and typically also the obligation to publish a reference offer for the alternative host access products, and to offer the alternative host access products with key performance indicators and service level guarantees, and also they impose a non-discrimination obligation. In many countries, the NOA sets specific rules which ensure a smooth migration for the end users. For example, an NOA may only allow a copper switch off in case a certain NGA coverage has been reached, or an NOA may demand that the SMP operator has to offer a guard period at the end of the notice period in case copper is still in use. In no country there was a need to set specific rules with regard to the impact of the copper switch off on the universal service. Permission to close MDFs. The SMP operators typically do not need any further explicit permission and are allowed to close MDFs if the rules set by the NOAs are fulfilled. Thank you for your attention, and I hand over to the co-chairs of the end-user working group, Paulo and Luis.
Next task, please. Next slide, please. Well, The Article 123 of the European Electronic Communication Code gives to BEREC a specific task, that is the task to monitor the market technological developments of the different types of electronic communication services and to write by the 21st of December 2021 an opinion on those developments and their impact on the application of the end-user provisions of the code, which are contained in Title 3 of Part 3 of the code. In particular, in the opinion, BEREC is asked to assess to what extent the end-user provisions of the code are able to meet the objectives which are set in Article 3 of the code, and more specifically on the capability of end users to make free and informed choices and their ability to switch with ease their provider. Then, if this doesn't happen, if any lack of this ability has resulted in any market distortion of end user harm, then if the introduction of number-independent intercommunication services has posed as any threats to the effective access to emergency services, and then the likely cost of any potential readjustments of the obligations of Title 3 Part 3 or their impact on innovation for providers of electronic communication services. In the opinion, the Commission shall publish a report on the application of the provisions of Title 3 of Part 3 and shall submit a legislative proposal to amend that title if it considers it necessary to do so in order to ensure that the objectives set out in Article 3 are met, are continue to be met. Next slide, please. In order to write the opinion, BEREC relies on a number of sources. First of all, we used a questionnaire that we distributed to all the NRAs and containing a very detailed questionnaire containing information on the application of the provisions. Of course, most of the application concern the application of previous of the provisions contained in the previous code, since a very limited number of countries at the time of the questionnaire, which is August of this year, had already transposed the code into their national legislation. Then on the 1st of April in the Stakeholder Forum, the BEREC Chair introduced to the stakeholder the project, and immediately thereafter a letter was sent to the stakeholder asking a number of questions concerning the application of the code. And then there was also some back office, and we, in that case, use a number of BEREC reports and studies. And in particular, we also relied on the survey on the electronic communication, the Eurobarometer survey on electronic communication in the EU that was published in June of this year. Next slide, please. As the most important market and technological developments on that could affect end-user rights, as they were signaled by the respondents to the questionnaire, we find that most of the respondents put a particular emphasis on the continued growth and importance of data usage, mainly in mobile communication, but also more generally on the increase of demand for connectivity and the importance of relying on a well-functioning high-capacity internet connections. Also related to this topic, there was also the impact of the COVID-19 crisis in the sector. And as a more specific reference to end-user protection topics, there was also a reference on the fact that nowadays electronic communication services are more and more provided in the form of bundles. Next slide, please. Going straight to the conclusions. First of all, there was a general remark that applies to most of the areas of consumer protection which were studied and analyzed in the opinion. That is that also considering the 3-year span of the report, that market and technological developments will not likely impact on the application on end user right. And therefore, as a consequence, there is no significant risk that the objectives contained in Article 3 of the code will not be met. On the other hand, we are aware that only a limited number of countries, of member states, have transposed the code into their legislation. And even those who have already done so have not yet gained a sufficient experience in the application of the code. And for this reason, BEREC suggests to keep closely monitoring the sector, especially because some of the topics, of the issues that have been singled out in the opinion are very likely to evolve very fast over the next years. Then going to specific areas of consumer protection, starting from transparency and contractual information. The general remark applies to this area in the sense that the provision on transparency, on contractual information should have a positive impact on end users and should foster the development of the retail market. Anyhow, there are some issues, some areas that should be kept under close scrutiny, which are direct carrier billing, premium rate services, and more generally the issue of fraud. And we should not forget that BEREC has published a report in this area recently that was approved at plenary 3. And then another issue to closely monitor is the implementation of the contract summary template. As contract duration and termination and provider switching, BEREC is of the opinion that there's no need at this time to introduce any amendment in the provision regarding contract duration, termination, and switching, and generally number portability. Again, within this area, it's very important to monitor the evolution of the issues related to the provision of services in bundles and regarding the electronic SIM and the over-the-air application updating of eSIM. If we go then to effective access to emergency services, BEREC notes that the regulatory provisions in this area have not yet completed, since there is, for instance, there's a delegated act to be published by the Commission at the end of next year. And therefore, at this time, there is no need to introduce any amendment in these provisions. Anyhow, very preliminarily and without any prejudice to what BEREC will write in the opinion to the delegated act, we note that there may be some issues on nomadic VoIP services, and when in those cases where VoIP services are provided by means of SIP servers, which are located in other countries than the country of origination of the call. Finally, as equivalent access and choice for end user with disability, BEREC is of the opinion that the new code introduced a number of very new provisions, and therefore, as this time, which were not even contained in the previous code. So for this reason, there's no very limited experience in the application of those provisions, and therefore it's very difficult at this stage to provide any general consideration. And with this, I have ended it, and I will leave the floor to Antonio and Erwin. Thank you.
Many thanks, Paolo. Today, the BEREC proposes two documents under the responsibility of the regulatory framework. I will deal with the first one, which is the opinion on the national implementation and the functioning of the General Authorisation regime. As you all know, Article 122, paragraph 3 of the code requires BEREC to publish by the 21st of December this year an opinion on the national implementation and on the actual functioning of the general authorization regime, as well as on the impact on the functioning on the internal market. On the basis of such opinion, the Commission may then follow up with a report on the application of the general authorization regime, and if the case, with specific proposal for any legislative review which the Commission may deem it appropriate. If we look at the code provision, the remit of the BEREC opinion is quite wide, and it is supposed to cover the overall working of the general authorization regime, both in terms of national implementation of the new provision, as well as in terms of operational effectiveness of the scheme and its, let's say, ability to pursue the goal of the single market. In order to comply with such tasks, the BEREC has collected the first NRA's views and experience in the day-to-day implementation of the current and the new framework. And at the second point in time, around summer, a call for input has been launched, which ran during the month of June to August, and under which we received 10 contributions by relevant stakeholders, which have been very useful to address the reasoning around the opinion. We can then move to the structure of the opinion, which is composed by 3 chapters. The first one provides an overview of the state of the national transposition process. As you all know, as it has been already pointed out by my former colleague, transposition is late, has been late in various member states, so no real conclusive reflection could be drawn. However, we based on the snapshot of national transposition choices, and we can already identify some trends waiting for a fully fledged analysis of the transposition choices in Europe. One of them is the fact that the notification duty was confirmed in most member states, and so it is the case also for the use of the BEREC template, which is expected to be very useful also, that means this is confirmed by the stakeholders, in order to promote more harmonization in the general authorization grounds. Chapter 2 is focused on the stakeholders' view, which are basically focusing on 3 main areas. The first area is related to the functioning of the general authorization scheme, and on the challenges which have been, let's say, detected both within the very specific code provision, the framework provision actually, more than the code, because I was telling you that the code somehow solved some of the problem, and other stemming from specific pieces of legislation which are not sectoral legislation. When it comes to the main issues identified stemming from the sectoral provision, we have noted the difference in the format of the notification, the process to submit them, and the level of details. While positive expectations from the market players are flagged on the implementation of the code, and in particular on the adoption of the single notification template, which has been published by BEREC. Other aspects raised by the stakeholders are regarding the level of the changes which are subject to new notification, as well as on specific differences in terms of reporting obligation, or also in terms of the level of administrative fees and the sanctions which are imposed by relevant NRAs or competent authority. This despite the fact that there are clear provisions still within the current framework and the code targeted to address the level of those amounts. Aspects which are laying outside the sectoral regulation are referring to the need to use the national language, or to specific requests or specific documents that are requested at national level on the basis of national, administrative, criminal, or commercial legislation. The second point where stakeholders raise their views is on the need to consider, in a forward-looking approach, the possibility to broaden the scope of the general authorization regime, and in particular the notification obligation, on other market players, and in particular the so-called number-independent interpersonal communication services. This request is based on a different set of reasoning, ranging from the need to ensure to NRAs the possibility to effectively monitor the market, to the possibility of implement effectively consumer protection rules, some of them, as we know, already applicable to the mix, and also in terms of the need of guaranteeing a long-term fair competition, and so to put all of the market players on a level playing field. Third and final, on the EU database, there have been positive expectations raised by the market players on the functioning of the database managed by the BEREC office, although some technical aspects and suggestions on some functionalities have been raised, and this will be duly considered also within BEREC and together with the BEREC office. The third chapter is basically devoted to some final message. I won't name them conclusion, because the main message is that some more in-depth and sound analysis could be done once we will have the new code fully transposed and operational all across Europe. We can move to the next slide, please. So the main messages, the main takeaways of the opinion are that there's a general satisfaction for the main features and the functioning of the general authorization scheme, and to some extent also even more positive expectations are on the functioning of the novelties introduced by the code. There are still some challenges identified, but the novelties introduced by the code are expected to narrow down the differences at national level. When it comes to the some more forward-looking perspective, still considering the fact that there's need to wait for the full transposition, it could be interesting to see the effectiveness of the new provision, and also the possibility to consider the scope of general authorization regime to other market players. It is advisable to do this on the basis of a sounder experience of the code when we will have national implementation experience more robust to be analyzed at European level. This is also why one of the most relevant aspects of the incoming work program is to keep on analyzing the transposition experience and the implementation experience of the code around Europe. That's all on this opinion. I will leave the floor to Erwin for the report on the COVID experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonello. So I'm going to present to you our very recent report on the COVID-19 crisis, lessons learned regarding communications, networks, and services for a resilient society. Next slide, please. So as we live in this world, we are really need to deal with the COVID crisis, and BEREC was also requested and required to prepare several reports on the COVID-19 crisis, on the impact of the COVID-19 situation. This slide illustrates the recollections of the different reports we are publishing. So you can recall that when the pandemic started, BEREC immediately started publishing reports on the status of the electronic communication networks, on the internet capacity in the European member states. Those reports were published on a weekly, monthly, later on a quarterly basis, and hopefully, as the situation is hopefully getting better, so we will finish this type of reporting. BEREC also commissioned an external consultant to deal with the post-COVID measures to close the digital divide. So this report is also available at the BEREC website. And the last report, which I'm going to present to you, this was recently adopted by the Board of Regulators. And this is about the experiences we gained, we learned during the COVID crisis. This latter report is based on the results of the previous two reports. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here you can see the structure of the report. So the report consists of 4 chapters. In the first chapter, we summarize the measures adopted by the member states. This part of the report is a descriptive section. In the second chapter, we tried to assess or make an assessment on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, starting from the financial impacts on the operators' bottom line. Also, in this chapter, we analyzed what kind of open internet related issues we needed to deal with, just like commercial practices, traffic management, transparency requirements. In the third chapter of the report, we presented some case studies, which we found useful and exciting to learn from, and among the case studies, with cases which highlighted the cooperation between the different stakeholders, how NRAs dealt with monitoring activities, case studies on spectrum auctions and temporary spectrum licensing, and e-contract termination. So this is how the report looks like. And on the next slide, I'm going to present the main findings of this activity. By the way, we also ran a public consultation on this report, and we also received many valuable contributions from the stakeholders all around Europe. And we try to integrate their opinion to this report, to this final report. So what are the main lessons we learned? We could see that the relationships between the NRAs, operators, and the different national and European institutions was very important. And it was really a very good basis to deal with the crisis situation. We can also see, and so fortunately this is quite clear now, but at the beginning of the pandemic we weren't sure whether this would work. But the European telecom networks were really resilient, and we couldn't identify main network shortages during the pandemic. We could also see that operators immediately and constantly they were monitoring their networks. And by this, they try to preempt capacity shortages, and also, which was important, is that they immediately try to cooperate with NRAs, governments, and other digital platforms. That was very helpful. We could also see that all of the stakeholders, so not only operators and us NRAs, but end users and content and application providers contributed to the smooth functioning of the internet. We also wanted to find out what is the perceptions, whether the NRAs were able to deal with this crisis, whether we had the necessary regulatory tools to deal with the crisis. And the consensus is that the NRAs had sufficient regulatory tools to deal with a crisis like this. We also wanted to find out whether the institutional framework worked well and the sectoral institutional framework worked well, and the answer is clearly yes. So this is how both stakeholders and NRAs can see the situation. And so overall, we could see that that the European electronic communication sector demonstrated its capability to successfully deal with the pandemic, and by this they could really support the daily activities of citizens and businesses in the European Union. One outstanding issue which were identified by us and by many of the stakeholders that was really crucial to deal with disinformation during the crisis, and for that it seems that we couldn't really find the silver bullet, and so definitely in this area, we still, with all of the stakeholders, we need to work and find out how we can work against disinformation in a crisis situation. With this, I finish the presentation and I pass the floor back to Michel.
Thank you very much, Erwin. And now we will start our second Q&A session with a question from Mike Battilana, a citizen from Italy. This is the question for the FNE co-chairs, Willem and Lars Eric. And I just will read out the very question. How is it possible that operators can somehow deceive the public and town administrators by continuing to advertise and bill other technologies like VDSL or LTE as fiber? And should fiber not be used only for FTTB, FTTH? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Michel, for this question. It's a very interesting question. However, it more concerns advertising. And I have to mention that the BEREC report on a consistent approach to migration and copper switch off is based on the rules set by the NRAs for migration and copper switch off. And these rules have been set on the networks actually deployed or are planned to be deployed, and not on information which is used in advertising. So questions regarding legal provisions, to what extent the term fiber is allowed to be used in advertising is out of scope of the report, but maybe the national regulatory authority in Italy, who may know which rules apply with regard to this in Italy, ARCHCOM.
Thank you very much, Willem. I have a second set of questions asked by Oliver Fug from Telefonica for the regulatory framework working group co-chairs. How far is the process of transferring or including authorizations fields until 21 December 2020, sorry, to the BEREC database by 21 December 2021? And will the regulatory framework working will follow up on and inform stakeholders about the coming into use of the database by all NRAs? So I guess this is for Antonello. Over to you.
Yes, thanks for the question. Actually, this is a very specific question that we also pose ourselves, because after the summer break, we started analyzing how the process of population of the BEREC database was, and at that point in time, very few NRAs or competent authorities have started populating the database for several reasons. Some of them are related to the lack of transposition, and so the lack of a specific provision which are fundamental to decide if you have to use the notification the system or not, if you are going to endorse in full the BEREC template or not, and other also related to technicalities linked to the functioning of the system. In this second respect, actually, I would just like to flag that several tests have been made by the relevant NRAs and the BEREC office, and I really, on behalf of BEREC and of NRAs, I would like to thank the BEREC office for the availability and for the great support they provided to all NRAs in these technical activities. I don't have the figure with me to reply to the question in precise terms, but my personal feeling is that once we are approaching the deadline provided by the code and looking at the set of questions that are circulating around in these days, there's an acceleration, and several NRAs, I think and I hope, will be ready to meet the deadline that is identified in the 21st of December. Obviously, we will check this. It is important for us, and the let's say the function of the database is one of the areas where we would like to further investigate and to draw a line on where we are starting from the expiration of the deadline. And then we can discuss, and this is also a takeaway for us and for next year, we can discuss internally and with the BEREC how to proceed in this respect, how to make public the outcome of the situation after the deadline, how we can further improve and help individual NRAs to comply with the code commitment. This is my reply. I don't know if Erwin, which is very, very closely involved together with me, has anything to add. Probably.
That was a clear answer, Antonello.
Okay. I hope this is also clear for Mr. Fu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonello. As there is no other question, we have come to an end of this public debriefing, and I would like to thank all our participants today for their interaction, presentation, and questions. And with this fourth public debriefing, I also come to an end of this year as BEREC Chair. And of course, as one of my predecessors said, this is a kind of one-in-a-lifetime experience, and I would like to express my gratitude to my BIPT colleagues, TN Chair, team members, but also to all the mini board members, the co-chairs, the members of the Board of Regulators, and members of the BEREC office. I've also really appreciated the engagement with stakeholders, especially during the last Stakeholder Forum. But as you know, this is very important for us to engage with you. And for next year, I will be helping, supporting Anne-Marie as Vice Chair, outgoing Chair for 2022. But I'm pretty confident that she will be an outstanding BEREC Chair. And I wish her the best of luck, of course. So maybe once again, repeat that our next Stakeholder Forum will be on the 23rd of March in Brussels, so you can mark your calendar already, and that our next public debriefing, will take place on Wednesday, 16 March in the afternoon, and I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon, everyone. Take care, and already a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year 2022.